Well, once again, as we begin this final session together, I just want to thank you again for joining us, for being with us, for being a part of this conference. And I also want to say a word of thanks to our Daily Bread ministry staff there in Jakarta. They do such a fantastic job, not just on events like this and other things, in-person events there locally, but they just do a great job of trying to help people connect with biblical resources to help them in their relationship with the Lord. And let me just encourage you as we begin our final study together for this time. If there's any time you have a need for anything in your relationship with the Lord or in terms of a biblical study tool or something, please contact our office. I know that they would love to help you, and that's why they're there. So thanks for being with us. And again, a special thank you to our team there in Jakarta for the great work that they do. So now we come to number 4. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're in New York City, August 7th, 1974. Now, I have to imagine that. I've never been to New York City. Probably you haven't either. If you have, you're way ahead of me. But on August 7th, 1974, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center were not yet finished. And yet, as you walk down the street on this beautiful sunny day, you can't help but have your eyes drawn up to these giant towers that are being built in downtown Manhattan. And as your eyes go up, you see that it appears to be some kind of a cable linked between the two buildings. That's odd. Maybe it has something to do with the construction or the way they're building the upper parts of the towers or something. But then as you're looking and trying to figure out what that wire's there for, you see someone actually step out from the roof of one of the buildings onto that wire and make their way across to the other side. Now, if you stay there and watch what's going on almost a fourth of a mile above you, as you watch that, if you watch the whole time for 45 minutes, you'll see this person go across back and forth 8 times. And along the way, there'll be times when they'll dance, they'll bounce around, they'll wave to the crowd below. I mean, I don't know about you. I have a real issue with heights. And it's because I fell off a bridge when I was a young man. And so heights and me don't get along very well. I think about this guy up in that wire, and it comes to me in one word, and that one word is, he's crazy. This guy's just absolutely crazy. But the fact of the matter is, Philip Petit, who was the wire walker on that day, was not crazy, although what he was doing seemed pretty crazy to me. Over years and years and years of training and practice and training and practice and training and practice, he had developed a highly attuned sense of balance. A highly attuned sense of balance. And that's what enabled him, even up there with the buildings moving and the wind swaying, to be able to maintain his balance on that wire. It wasn't something that he did in 5 minutes. It was something that was years in the making. Much in the way that any great skill is developed over years of training, whether it's football or piano or science or whatever the skill might be. It takes years of training to develop that skill. Balance is one of those really important life skills that takes years and years to develop. I mean, think about it in a physical sense. Think about that little child, the first time that little infant tries to sit up and they wobble around and then they fall over and then they try to sit up and they wobble around and maybe they last a little longer. And then eventually that little child takes its first very tentative steps. And then that little child's first tentative steps lead to walking and then to running. And then they have to learn how to ride a bicycle. And there's a lot of skinned knees and crocodile tears on failure moments. But then once it's learned, it's learned. And that balance is set. And then if we follow that little child forward, maybe someday we see them in the Olympics doing gymnastics, doing the balance beam. balance is a hugely important thing in life physically, but it's also a very important thing in a world that is so terribly out of balance. We live in a world of abundance and excess in many cultures. I know here in the West, we live in a world of excess, and it's so easy to lose your balance because there's so much. There's so much that you can access. I mean, even just think in terms of the internet and the unbelievable information to which we have access. Now, we know that we can't trust all that information, and so we have to be very careful what we do with it. But the reality is, just having access to that volume of information is an extraordinary thing. We live in a world of abundance. And in a world of abundance, it's really easy to lose your balance, to lose your perspective, and to maybe get dragged into areas that aren't always healthy. And that's where we come to in our final session, because this is where we begin to see the wise King Solomon sort of tumble off into some bad areas. And it's because he loses his balance spiritually. He has so much excess of everything that he loses his ability to have balance on anything. And we see that pictured in 1 Kings chapter 4, and then we'll see the result of it a little later in a different text. But notice it says in 1 Kings 4, verse 20, Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. They were eating and drinking and rejoicing. Again, that pictures the whole nation in a season of prosperity. And Bible scholars still today refer to Solomon's reign as the golden age of Solomon. Why? Because it was the greatest time of peace and prosperity that Israel would ever known. Their greatest time of influence, the time that they were the largest. I mean, Israel was a force to be reckoned with at this time during Solomon's reign. So what did that abundance look like? I mean, the people were eating and drinking and rejoicing. Okay. What did it look like for Solomon? It says, beginning in verse 21, now Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. And they brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Who brought tribute? All these kingdoms. Solomon was not only ruling over the kingdom of Israel, but over all these other kingdoms as well. And his provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour and 60 cores of meal. Now, a core was a donkey load. And again, in Western terms, I don't know what this translates to, but 30 cores would be about 185 bushels, and 60 cores would be 375 bushels for one day, plus 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed oxen, 100 sheep, besides wild game like deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. For he had dominion over everything west of the river, from Tipshah even to Gaza, over all the kings west of the river, and he had peace on all sides around him. So Judah and Israel lived in safety, every man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. So when we start talking about abundance, we're talking about an extravagance of wealth on the part of Solomon, an extravagance of wealth, so much so that the Queen of Sheba traveled just to see Solomon in all his splendor. The magnificence in which he lived in his house, the way he was dressed, the way his wives were dressed, the way all of these things were appointed. Solomon lived in extraordinary extravagance of wealth. And what we know is that even though it's not a sin to be wealthy, it is dangerous. It can be dangerous. I mean, the New Testament tells us that the love of money is at the root of all evil. The love of money is at the root of all evil. And when we get into this cycle of consumptive materialism, which is a term that we use a lot, especially here in the West today, when we get into this consumptive materialism, it can very much be a warning sign that we're getting out of balance with life. Out of balance with life. So there was extravagance of wealth that contributes to his losing his balance. But there's also a quest for security. Notice it continues, 1 Kings 4:26. And Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. And those deputies provided for King Solomon and all who came to King Solomon's table, each in his month. They left nothing lacking. They also brought barley and straw for the horses and swift steeds to the palace where it should be, each according to his charge. You say, well, okay, he's got a lot of horses. What's the problem? Well, first of all, on a practical level, taking care of them. I mean, we're told in the scriptures that Solomon built 3 cities just as chariot cities, just for cities to house the people who cared for the horses. Those were the cities of Hazor, Gezer, and Megiddo. Cities just to look after the horses for his chariots. And you say, well, okay, what's the problem with having so many chariots and having so many horses? Well, we talked about this a couple of years ago when we looked at the life of Elisha, because he kept saying the chariots and horsemen of Israel. Well, chariots in Solomon's day and in the ancient world were kind of the cutting edge of military technology. Today, the cutting edge of military technology is probably drone warfare. Well, back then, it was the chariots and the horses and the horsemen who drove them that were the cutting edge of military technology, because the one who had the best and the most chariots had a decisive advantage in combat. Decisive advantage in combat. And looking to that military edge for security was a danger point that was warned against in Deuteronomy 17. Listen to Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 17. When you enter into the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me, which they did. You shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God chooses, one from among your countrymen. You shall set as king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. Moreover, he, the king, shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. He shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away, nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself. All of this is about, where do you find security? Multiplying horses was looking to the horses and the chariots and the military technology to be your security. Now, in today's world, smart nations have armies, and they have them to protect the nation. And that's all well and good. But for Israel, God was always to be the point of their security. That's why the Psalm says, some trust in chariots, we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Some trust in horses, we trust in the name of the Lord our God. One of the things that would differentiate Israel, yes, they would have an army, the king would lead it, but that's not where they looked for their security. They did not look for their security in wealth. They were not to look for their security in military. They were to look to God, their God, for their security. And so we have the extravagance of wealth that can cause you to lose your balance. We can have this quest for security that can cause you to lose your balance. But it goes even further with the pursuit of knowledge. In 1 Kings 4, verse 29. Now God gave Solomon wisdom and very great discernment and breadth of mind like the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the sons of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. And his fame was known in all the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, a couple of hundred of which are gathered in the book of Proverbs. And his songs were 1,005, at least one of which is in the book of Psalms. And he spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon, even to the hyssop that grows on the wall. So now he's into botany. And he spoke of animals and birds and creeping things and fish, ornithology and zoology. And men came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all the kings of the earth, who had heard his great wisdom. But again, there's a dark side to that. There's a dark side to that. In James chapter 1, where we were told, as we saw earlier, that we can pray for wisdom and we'll receive it from the Lord. It says in James 1:17, every good and perfect gift bestowed comes down from above, from the Father of lights. The danger in the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of wisdom is that we can try to find significance in our learning rather than to have our significance and our identity in our God. All this stuff comes down from God. It's good. It's not evil. It's not bad, but it's not best. Jeremiah 9:23-24 says, let the one who boasts not boast in his wisdom or in his knowledge or in his might or in his power, but let him boast in this, that he knows and understands God. That's the priority. It's not a matter that these things aren't good. It's not bad to have food, although the volume of food available to Solomon is crazy. It's not bad or evil to have a strong military as long as you don't place your security in that. It's not wrong to pursue knowledge as long as that's not where you get your significance. All of these things are things which in and of themselves are good gifts that are given to us by God, but all of these things are also things that can contribute to us losing our balance. We look for security today on a national level in military, on a personal level, in retirement accounts and all kinds of things, so that one day we can have a nest egg of money that we can fall back on so that we're secure in our old age. Is that wrong? No, as long as ultimately we see our security in God. The answer to consumptive materialism and the quest for security and the pursuit of knowledge, the answer to that is not asceticism or living a life where we deprive ourselves of the good things God has provided. The answer to it is knowing when enough is enough. Can you have too much of a good thing? And Solomon's example tells us, yes, you can. You can very much have too much of a good thing when it makes you lose your balance. Paul wrote to Timothy and said, godliness with contentment is great gain. Contentment. Knowing when enough is enough. Knowing when we don't need that bit more, that extra, that over-the-top something that's really not necessary. And this translates even further into Solomon's life in his pursuit not only of wealth and security and power, but also in his pursuit of wives. And in 1 Kings, we see, let me find it here. In 1 Kings 11, now King Solomon loved many foreign women along with the daughter of Pharaoh. His first wife was the daughter of Pharaoh. She was a princess, and his marriage to the daughter of Pharaoh formed a political alliance between Israel and Egypt. Okay, that was how alliances were done in those days. And it says, he also, in addition to that, he loved Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not associate with them, neither shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods. Solomon held fast to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. Now, here's what that means. He entered into 700 of these political alliance marriages. 700 of them. 700 kingdoms with whom he struck an alliance through marriage. But then he had 300 concubines. These were kind of half-wives, and they were there simply to give sexual pleasure and satisfaction to Solomon. Now, you talk about losing your balance. I mean, couldn't somewhere along wife number 600, couldn't there have been this idea, okay, maybe I'm taking this a little too far. Maybe I don't need 300 concubines. That's almost one for every day of the year. I mean, think about that. 1,000 wives. Sometimes too much of a good thing is too much. And it can cause us to lose our balance. And what's so interesting is that it says, it came about, verse 4, when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Remember, we saw in that warning from Deuteronomy that not only were you not to multiply horses, you were not supposed to multiply wives either. Why? Because they would turn his heart away from God. Remember, when the temple was established, he said, we must be wholly devoted to the Lord. And he had been, but he wasn't anymore. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. And Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not follow the Lord fully, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem, for Moloch, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Thus he did for all his foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. It's so ironic. We began by talking about a study in contrast. It's so ironic that the king who built a temple for the worship of true God now ends up building places of worship for these false gods. Even Molech, to whom they offered their children as burnt sacrifices. I mean, folks, Solomon has well and truly lost his balance here. He has lost his balance, and the end result is that the Lord was very angry with Solomon because his heart was turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him and commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. So the Lord said to Solomon in verse 11, because you have done this, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. The kingdom of Judah would stay the southern kingdom, headquartered in Jerusalem. The other tribes, except for parts of the tribe of Benjamin, would form the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom, which would be headquartered in the city of Samaria. There are consequences to sinful choices, and Solomon's sinful choices that not only pursued extravagant wealth to the point of excess, to pursue security apart from God himself, not only in horses and chariots, but also in these political alliance marriages. The Solomon who pursued knowledge as a way of building his own significance. This same Solomon who built the temple of God went so far off the rails and so far out of bounds, losing his balance spiritually through his multiple wives. God says, I'm taking the kingdom away. I was going to leave it in David's family, but it's going to now belong to one of your servants. And your son's going to have part of it, but it's not going to be anything like it was. This disappointing end is because the wise king became foolish, because his heart was turned away. His heart was turned away by excess. His heart was turned away by the pursuit of knowledge. His heart was turned away by his many, many wives. His heart was turned away so that he was no longer wholly devoted to the Lord his God. And that becomes a warning to us because we live in times of excess. I mean, we may not multiply hundreds and hundreds of wives, and I certainly hope you don't, but we live in times of excess abundance as well, where it's easy to lose our balance in the multiplication of things. Jesus said, your life does not consist of the things which you possess. Your life is to consist of your relationship with God first and foremost. Keep your balance. Learn the valuable lesson of contentment when enough is enough. And to that end, the hymn writer said, "May the mind of Christ my Savior live in me from day to day, by his love and power controlling all I do and say." That's where contentment comes from. The mind of Christ being developed in us. I trust that this brief look today in the life of Solomon will be helpful and valuable to you, and perhaps serve as an important warning that even the wisest of all men can become foolish when he takes his eyes off the Lord and loses his spiritual balance. Let's pray and we'll be done. Father, once again, thank you for this time of consideration of the scriptures. Thank you for each one who has joined us. I pray that you would teach us to draw close to you, to live in your presence, to find our security and our significance in you as your children, and to maintain contentment and balance as we walk through a world of abundance and excess. Help us, Father, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. Thanks for being with us.